2 years before the earthquake. This is how the Book of Amos marks the date itself. Not by the year of a king, as was the custom. Not by a religious festival. By an earthquake. An earthquake so violent that more than 200 years later, the prophet Zechariah still spoke of it as a vivid memory for the people when he wrote that the inhabitants of Jerusalem would flee as they fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Excavations in ancient cities of that region, such as Hazor and Gezer, have found a layer of destruction dated to around 760 BC. Walls cracked in the same direction. Stones toppled in a way that only a massive tremor can explain. In other words, the earthquake really happened. The earth really shook. But a man had spoken of him before. A man who said things like, "The Lord roars from Zion," and warned that the earth would shake beneath the feet of a people who considered themselves too secure. This man did not live in a palace. He did not wear fine linen. He smelled of sheep and had calloused hands from handling sycamore fruit. His name was Amos. The book presents itself right in the first line, without any embellishment. The words of Amos, who was among the shepherds of Tekoa, about what he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. This is what Amos chapter 1, verse 1 says. Tekoa was a small village, about 16 kilometers south of Jerusalem, on the edge of the Judean desert. Harsh land, land of stone, strong sun, and sparse pasture. Those who lived there learned to survive with little and to see far ahead. A shepherd in that region would spend entire nights awake, watching over his flock against lions and thieves, gazing at the sky, listening to the silence. Amos was one of those. The text says that he was a cattle herder, a cattle breeder, and that he also cultivated sycamores, a tree related to the fig tree, which bore a simple fruit, food for poor people. This fruit needed to be pierced, lightly cut, to ripen properly. It was manual labor, repetitive, without any glory. Remember this detail, because later, at the most tense moment in the story, it is precisely this simple life that Amos will bring to the table as his response. Now, move up the map with the narration. Leave Judah, the southern kingdom, and enter Israel, the northern kingdom, because that is where God sent this shepherd. The northern kingdom was experiencing the best period in its history. Jeroboam II reigned for about 40 years, 40 years of victory after victory. The borders stretched almost to the size of Solomon's time. Assyria, the great empire that had astonished everyone, was distracted by internal problems. Trade flowed freely. Money poured in. Samaria, the capital, became a showcase of luxury. Archaeologists have found hundreds of pieces of worked ivory in the ruins of Samaria, exquisite ornaments that decorated furniture and walls in the houses of the rich. Amos himself speaks of ivory houses and winter houses and summer houses, people who had a house for each season of the year. On the outside, a blessed nation. On the inside, an open wound. Because all that wealth was being built on the backs of crushed people. The poor who couldn't pay a debt were sold into slavery. The judge accepted bribes at the courthouse door. The merchant used rigged scales, reducing the measure and increasing the price. The moneylender even took the debtor's clothes as collateral, the same clothes that the law of Moses commanded to be returned before sunset, because they were the poor man's only blanket. Amos saw all of this. He saw the rich lying on beds of ivory, while the worker was sold for a debt the size of a pair of sandals. And the worst part, All this was happening in a country steeped in religion. Bethel, the kingdom's sanctuary, was teeming with people. Sacrifices every day, tithes, songs, feasts. Since the time of the first Jeroboam, Bethel had housed a golden calf, and the people mixed the name of the true God with a cult invented for the king's convenience. The temples were packed and the courts were corrupt. Offerings went up and justice went down. It was in this context that the shepherd from Tekoa appeared, and the way he began to speak displayed an intelligence that still impresses those who study the text today. He didn't say a word against Israel. He started with the neighbors. "The Lord roars from Zion," he said. And then came the first sentence. "For 3 transgressions of Damascus, and for 4, I will not turn away its punishment." Damascus, the capital of Syria, Israel's historical enemy. The surrounding crowd must have enjoyed it. Then came Gaza, land of the Philistines, accused of selling entire populations into slavery. Then Tyre, which broke a brotherly alliance. Then Edom, which pursued its own relative with the sword. Then Ammon, guilty of war cruelties that the text cites with weight and reproach, without dwelling on the details. Then Moab, 6 nations, 6 enemies of Israel, 6 pronouncements of judgment. To those listening in Bethel, it sounded like music. A preacher condemning everyone we don't like is the most popular preacher in the world. Then Amos pointed to the south. For 3 transgressions of Judah, and for 4. Judah, the brother kingdom, the rival. They rejected the law of the Lord. They did not keep his statutes. For the northern audience, even better. Even Jerusalem was getting a rebuke. The trap was set. 7 nations condemned, and the audience applauded each one. Then the 8th sentence fell, and it bore their names. For 3 transgressions of Israel, and for 4, I will not turn away its punishment, because they sell the righteous for silver, and the needy for a pair of sandals. This is what is written in Amos chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. The applause died in their throats. The preacher who condemned the enemies was, in fact, a messenger sent against them, and the list of accusations that followed spoke neither of borders nor of enemy armies. It spoke of the daily life of those people. They trample the heads of the poor in the dust of the earth. They lie down beside any altar on clothes taken as collateral. They drink in the temple, wine bought with money from unjust fines. Amos also looked at the elite women of Samaria and used an image that no one has forgotten. He called them the cows of Bashan. Bashan was a region of fertile pasture, famous for its well-fed cattle. He was describing wealthy women who lived in comfort and said to their husbands, "Bring us some wine and let us drink." Unbeknownst to them, each of those cups was paid for with someone's hunger. The most important point of this sermon, however, was not against money. It was against worship. Listen to what God commanded to be said in Amos chapter 5, verses 21 to 24. I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and sacrifices, I will not accept them. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. Pause for a moment on this sentence. God calling the praise of his own people noise. The harps tuned, the choirs rehearsed, the incense rising, and on the other side, ears closed. The reason wasn't the quality of the music, it was the life of those who sang. To worship God on Saturday and crush the poor on Monday turned the entire service into an offense. What God asked for was no more sacrifice. It was justice flowing like a river that never dries up, constant, every day, everywhere. A perennial stream in that world was a rare thing. Most of the rivers in the region only had water during the rainy season. God was saying, "Your justice is like those seasonal rivers. It appears at the festival and disappears the rest of the year. I want a river that always flows." Then came the visions. The Lord showed Amos a cloud of locusts devouring the grass of the land, and the shepherd fell into intercession. "Lord God, forgive, I beg you. How will Jacob survive? He is small." And God relented from that punishment. Then he showed him a huge fire, consuming the deep sea and the land. And again Amos cried out, and again God relented. Twice the same shepherd who announced judgment pleaded for the life of the people who were going to condemn him. Anyone who thinks that prophets are people who take pleasure in announcing misfortune needs to read these two prayers. In the third vision, something changed. Amos saw the Lord standing on a wall with a plumb line in his hand. A plumb line is that weight tied to a string that a bricklayer still uses today to check if a wall is straight. The wall may look good from afar. The plumb line doesn't argue, doesn't negotiate, doesn't compromise. It only shows the truth. And God said, "Behold, I will set a plumb line in the midst of my people Israel. I will never again pass by them." The altars of Bethel would be destroyed, and the house of Jeroboam would fall by the sword. If this story of an ordinary man confronting an entire system is affecting you, let me tell you something quickly. This is exactly the kind of story this channel tells every week. Small people in the hands of a great God, with the Bible open and real historical context. If you're not already a subscriber, sign up now, because the confrontation that follows is one of the most intense in the entire Old Testament. Because it was at that point that the system reacted. And the system had a name: Amaziah, the priest of Bethel. Amaziah was no ordinary priest. He commanded the kingdom's official sanctuary, the crown's private chapel. His job, his prestige, his home, everything depended on Bethel continuing to function. When Amos's words began to circulate, Amaziah did what every complacent religious figure does when the truth threatens their position. He rushed to power. He sent a message to King Jeroboam, recorded in Amos chapter 7, verse 10. "Amos has conspired against you in the midst of the house of Israel. The land cannot bear all his words." Notice the tactic. Amos had no army, no party, not a single follower. But Amaziah turned preaching into a political crime. He called prophecy a conspiracy. It's the oldest accusation in the world against those who speak the truth. That one is dangerous, that one threatens order, that one needs to be silenced. And then the priest went to speak to the pastor, face to face. His words are in verse 12. "Go, you seer, flee to the land of Judah, and there eat your bread, and there prophesy. But do not prophesy any more in Bethel, for it is the king's sanctuary and the royal house." Every part of that sentence deserves attention. Flee to Judah. Go back to your land. No one here called you. Eat your bread there. Amaziah was accusing Amos of prophesying for money, as if prophecy were a profession and Judah were a better market. He was measuring the pastor by his own yardstick. If I live off religion, so does he. And the last part gives it all away. Bethel is the king's sanctuary. He didn't say God's sanctuary. He said the king's. Without realizing it, the priest confessed to whom that temple truly belonged. Amos's answer was forever etched in history. Chapter 7, verses 14 and 15. I am not a prophet, nor the son of a prophet, but a herdsman and a dresser of sycamore trees. But the Lord took me from tending the flock, and the Lord said to me, Go, prophesy to my people Israel. I don't make a living from this, Amaziah. I have a trade. I have livestock. I have my trees there in Tekoa. I didn't ask for this job. I didn't study for it. I don't earn anything from it. I was tending the cattle when a hand took me away from there. You work for the king's sanctuary. I was sent by the king of the sanctuary. And then the pastor, who hadn't sought a fight, delivered to Amaziah the harshest word in the entire book. Since the priest was telling God to shut up, God had a personal sentence for him. It's in verse 17. Amaziah's wife would end up dishonored in the streets of an invaded city, subjected to the most degrading fate that war imposes. His sons and daughters would fall by the sword. His land would be divided up by rope, parceled out by foreign soldiers. He himself would die far away, in an unclean land, a pagan land, without a burial in the promised land. And Israel, the entire kingdom, would certainly go into captivity out of its land. The man who said, "No prophesying here," heard the heaviest prophecy of all, addressed to his own household. He wanted to protect the king's sanctuary and lost everything the sanctuary paid. Tell me something and write it in the comments. On that day in Bethel, who would you have sided with? The educated, respected priest in expensive robes, supported by the king, or the dusty pastor who spoke in God's name without having anything to gain? The answer seems easy today. On that day, almost no one was on the right side. And the most terrifying announcement in the book was yet to come. It wasn't war. It wasn't famine. It was something else. Amos chapter 8, verse 11. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord God, when I will send a famine on the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. The people who sent the prophet away were about to discover the price of silence. They would run from sea to sea, searching for a word from God, and they would not find it. The voice they had expelled from Bethel would simply cease to speak. Is there a worse punishment than God granting the request of someone who says, "Don't speak to me anymore"? Now, pay attention to the greeting, because this is where this story gets chilling. 2 years later, the earthquake came, the same one from the first line of the book, the one that left marks on the stones of Hazor that archaeologists excavated almost 3,000 years later. The earth trembled beneath Bethel, exactly as the shepherd had roared. About 3 decades later, Assyria awoke. The empire that seemed dormant rose like an avalanche, and in the year 722 BC, Samaria fell. The ivory houses turned to rubble, the luxurious beds to ashes, and the people of the northern kingdom marched in chains into captivity, never to return as a nation. Word for word, what Amos had announced to Amaziah's face. Sometime later, King Josiah of Judah would go down to Bethel and reduce the altar of the golden calf to dust, fulfilling what had been said against that sanctuary. The king's temple disappeared. The king's priest became a footnote in history. And the words of the herdsman of Tekoa are being read now by you, almost 2,800 years later. When God chooses a messenger, it is not the diploma that guarantees delivery. It is the sending. But Amos doesn't end in darkness. In the final verses, after all the judgment, a promise appears that transcends the centuries. Chapter 9, verse 11. In that day I will raise up the fallen tabernacle of David and repair its breaches. Centuries later, in Jerusalem, at the first great council of the church, James stood up and quoted this very verse to explain what God was doing by reaching all peoples through Jesus. The promise spoken by the rejected pastor became the foundation of the church. The book that announces the plumb line ends by announcing restoration. Mountains dripping with new wine, cities rebuilt, a people planted in their land never to be uprooted again. The same God who tears down the crooked wall is the God who raises up the fallen house. Before we finish, this story needs to stop talking about Israel and start talking about you. First lesson: God doesn't wait for you to become someone important to use you. Amos made a point of saying what he wasn't. I am not a prophet. I am not the son of a prophet. His resume was cattle and sycamore trees. Perhaps you look at your life, your ordinary job, your dull routine, your lack of theological study, and think that God uses others, the prepared ones, those who have a pulpit. The desert of Tekoa disagrees. The nights spent watching over the sheep were Amos's seminary, and he didn't even know it. The place where you are now, the one that seems too small, may be exactly where a hand will reach you from behind the flock. Second lesson: examine your worship with a plumb line before the plumb line examines you. The people of Bethel sang, offered gifts, fasted, filled the sanctuary, and God called it all noise. The question Amos asks of his life is simple and cutting. Is there a distance between what you sing on Sunday and what you do to people on Monday? How do you treat those who work for you, those who owe you, those who depend on you? Because if justice doesn't flow during your week, praise won't rise on your weekend. Let justice flow like water, in your home, in your job, in your pocket. Third lesson: don't treat God's voice like Amaziah did. Every time the word confronts you and you change the subject, postpone it, or shut it off, you are saying, "In Bethel, don't prophesy anymore." The danger is that God takes the request seriously. The hunger to hear the word doesn't begin with a bang. It begins with small silences that we ourselves choose. If today there is still an open Bible in front of you and a voice bothering your heart, that has a name: mercy. And the psalmist had already warned in Psalm 95, verses 7 and 8, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts." At the beginning, this story opened with a strange date, 2 years before the earthquake. Now you understand. God dated the book based on the evidence, as if to say, "I warned beforehand, and the earth confirmed it afterward." The plumb line fell upon the wall of Israel almost 3,000 years ago. It continues to fall today upon walls that seem firm on the outside, upon nations, upon churches, upon your life and mine. In the next story, we will meet a prophet who preached in the same kingdom at the same time, but in a way no one expected. God commanded him to transform his own marriage into a living prophecy, and the pain in his home became a portrait of God's heart. Hosea's story will move you in a different way. The wall of Bethel has fallen. The shepherd's words have stood firm. When the plumb line is lowered onto your wall, what will it find?